The clerk held the marriage papers in midair and quietly asked, "Mr. Harlan, are you still willing to sign?" But before the giant cowboy could answer, the woman across from him made a request that left the entire station holding its breath. The morning train hissed to a stop beneath a sky the color of cold steel, and every pair of eyes on the Dust Creek platform turned toward the woman carrying a single worn trunk. Luke Harlan stepped forward without hesitation, taking her luggage but not her choice. Before anyone could seal the marriage, she asked to read every line of the contract and insisted her work, and her name, would stand beside the ranch records if she stayed. The silence that followed felt heavier than the Wyoming wind, and Luke's next decision would shape far more than a marriage. Stay with me, and tell me in the comments, what would have earned your trust in that moment? The train whistle echoed across the frozen valley just as the first light spilled over the hills outside Dust Creek. Luke Harlan waited beside the platform with one gloved hand resting on the saddle of his black gelding. Frost clung to the fence rails. A north wind rolled through the station yard, carrying the smell of coal smoke and damp timber. Around him, a few ranch hands, merchants, and travelers pretended not to stare. They all knew why he was there. The wealthy rancher from Harlan Ridge had ordered a bride. Luke checked the silver pocket watch his father had carried before him. 7:15. Right on time. The locomotive slowed with a long hiss of steam. Iron wheels groaned against the rails until the train came to a stop. Porters lowered luggage while passengers stepped carefully onto the wooden platform. Several women appeared first, greeted by husbands or family members. Then the crowd grew unusually quiet. A woman wearing a faded brown coat stepped down alone, holding a small weathered trunk with both hands. Her dress had been carefully repaired at the sleeves. Her boots carried the pale dust of many miles. She paused only long enough to look at the station sign. Dust Creek. She had arrived. Nora James adjusted the brim of her plain traveling hat and lifted the trunk before anyone offered assistance. Two boys standing near the freight office whispered to each other. An elderly woman beside the ticket window lowered her newspaper. No one stepped forward. Luke walked across the platform without hurry. His boots sounded heavy against the planks. He stood well over most men in town, broad through the shoulders from years of branding cattle, repairing fences, and driving herds across rough country. His size often made strangers nervous before he ever spoke. He stopped in front of Nora. "You must be Miss James." She met his eyes directly. "I am." Neither smiled. Neither looked away. Luke reached for the trunk. She held it another second. "I can carry it." "I know." His answer surprised her. "But I'll carry it anyway." She released the handle without another word. The trunk felt lighter than he expected. Behind them, someone chuckled quietly. The town clerk emerged from the station office carrying a leather folder tied with a faded ribbon. "Mr. Harlan," he said with an awkward grin. "Still time to reconsider before the paperwork is filed." The remark hung in the cold air. Luke never answered. Before he could move, Nora stepped toward the clerk. "I'd like to read every page first." The clerk blinked. "The agreement?" "The agreement." He fumbled with the papers before handing them over. Nora stood beside the station wall where the morning light was strongest. She read slowly, one page after another, paying close attention to every sentence. Luke watched in silence. Most people would have hurried through. She didn't. When she reached the final page, she looked up. "There is one condition I'd like added." The clerk looked almost offended. "Added?" She nodded. "If I become Mrs. Harlan, I expect my work to be recognized as work. If I manage supplies or keep financial records for the ranch, my name will appear beside those records." Silence settled over the platform. Someone near the freight wagon muttered softly. The clerk cleared his throat. "That isn't Customary. I didn't ask if it was customary. Luke studied her face. There was no anger, no pleading, only quiet certainty. He had expected gratitude. He had expected hesitation. Instead, he found a woman negotiating the future of her own life before signing it away. Luke finally spoke. "Write it." The clerk looked from one to the other. "Mr. Harlan, are you certain?" "I said, write it." A fresh line was added beneath the agreement. Nora read it twice before signing. Her handwriting was neat and steady. Luke signed below hers. The clerk folded the papers and handed each of them a copy. No ceremony, no applause. Only the wind pushing snow across the street. Luke secured the trunk in the back of his wagon. His black horse stamped impatiently against the frozen ground. As they climbed aboard, a tall man leaned casually against the hitching rail outside the general store. Grant Whitmore. He removed his hat with exaggerated politeness. "So that's your new wife?" Luke gave a short nod. Grant's eyes drifted toward Nora. "I hope Harlan Ridge treats you kindly. It's a lonely place." Nora answered before Luke could. "I've worked lonelier." Grant smiled, though it never reached his eyes. "I'm sure you have." He stepped aside. The wagon rolled away from the station. For several miles, neither of them spoke. The road wound between open prairie and low hills where patches of snow still clung to the shadows. Fence posts disappeared beneath white drifts. A hawk circled above a stand of cottonwoods along Willow Creek. Luke kept both hands on the reins. "You've traveled far." "Colorado." "I know." Another silence. "The trip wasn't easy." "No." "You still came." "I don't leave unfinished business behind." He glanced toward her. That answer stayed with him. Near midday, they stopped beside a small spring where clear water flowed beneath a layer of ice. Luke watered the horse while Nora opened her travel bag. She broke a biscuit in half, offered one piece toward him. He hesitated. "You should keep it." "I packed enough." He accepted it. Neither spoke while they ate. Only the sound of water slipping beneath ice filled the space between them. By late afternoon, the hills opened. Harlan Ridge spread across the valley below. Weathered barns, long fences. A broad ranch house with smoke rising from the chimney. Cattle moved slowly across the winter pasture. Nora looked over the land without saying anything. Luke noticed. "It needs work." She nodded once. "So does every place worth staying?" For reasons he couldn't explain, those words settled somewhere deep inside him. As the wagon passed beneath the wooden entrance gate marked Harlan Ridge, Luke realized he had stopped wondering whether he had made the right decision. Instead, he found himself wondering who Nora James really was. Behind one of the barn windows, Otis Webb watched the wagon arrive. His expression never changed. But the ledger resting beneath his hand quietly disappeared into a locked desk drawer. Otis Webb closed the drawer with a soft click before stepping outside to greet his employer. "Welcome home, Mr. Harlan." Luke climbed down from the wagon. "We made good time." Otis tipped his hat toward Nora. "Ma'am." She answered with a polite nod. Nothing more. Luke carried her trunk up the wide porch. The ranch house stood solid against the Wyoming wind, built from thick pine beams darkened by years of snow and sun. A pair of rocking chairs faced the valley. One carried a folded horse blanket across the seat. The other had gathered a thin layer of dust. Inside, warmth drifted from the cast-iron stove. The entry hall was larger than Nora expected. A grandfather clock marked each passing second. Mounted antlers lined one wall. Family photographs rested on a shelf above the fireplace. Luke's parents, ranch hands standing beside prize cattle. A younger Luke holding the reins of a chestnut horse. The house had everything money could buy, except signs that anyone truly lived there. Luke placed the trunk near the staircase. "You can choose whichever bedroom feels comfortable," Nora slowly looked through the front rooms before answering. I'd rather see the pantry first. Luke blinked. The pantry? If food isn't kept properly, the rest of the house doesn't matter. For the first time that day, the corner of his mouth almost lifted. This way. He opened a heavy pine door beside the kitchen. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Flour, beans, coffee, salt, molasses, barrels of oats. Everything appeared organized from a distance. Nora stepped inside. She removed one glove and ran her fingers across the nearest flour sack. Dust settled unevenly. She crouched beside a barrel and checked the chalk markings. Then another. Then another. Luke remained silent. She wasn't admiring the supplies. She was counting them. Who keeps inventory? She asked. Otis? How often? Every month. She nodded without comment. The answer seemed to satisfy her less than the shelves themselves. Later that afternoon, Luke showed her the rest of Harlan Ridge. The horse barn. The blacksmith shed. The smokehouse. The chicken coop tucked beside a windbreak of cottonwoods. More than 30 ranch hands worked the property through the winter. Some tipped their hats politely. Others simply stared before returning to their chores. Nora noticed every face, every gate, every wagon, every storage building. She asked few questions, but she remembered everything. That evening, supper was simple. Beef stew, fresh biscuits, black coffee poured into thick white mugs chipped around the rim. Luke ate quietly across the long oak table. The room could have seated 12 people. Only 2 chairs were occupied. You've always lived here? Nora asked. My father built this house. And after he passed? I stayed. She looked toward the empty chairs. They're all still here. Luke followed her eyes. The place settings weren't there. The memories were. After supper, she gathered the plates before he could reach them. You don't have to. I know. It was the same answer he had given her at the station. She disappeared into the kitchen. Luke found himself smiling before he realized he was doing it. The ranch settled into silence. Outside, the wind brushed against the porch roof. Somewhere beyond the corrals, a horse stamped inside its stall. Luke carried a lantern through the yard for his usual evening rounds. When he returned nearly an hour later, a narrow strip of light still glowed beneath the kitchen door. He stepped inside. Nora sat alone at the long table. 3 ledgers lay open before her. An ink bottle rested beside a fresh sheet of paper. She had rolled her sleeves above her wrists. Dark ink stained 2 fingertips. You should be sleeping, Luke said quietly. She didn't look up. I will. Another line. Another figure. Another correction. You understand bookkeeping? I managed supply records at the mining camp. I didn't know. You didn't ask. The words carried no sharpness, only fact. Luke walked closer. Rows of numbers covered both pages. Receipts, feed purchases, freight charges from Cheyenne, harness repairs, cattle sales. She circled one column. This shipment says 20 sacks of oats. She pointed toward another receipt. But payment was made for 28. Luke frowned. Maybe they ordered extra. Then where are they? He had no answer. Nora carefully turned another page. The pattern repeated. Not once. Several times. Small differences. Never large enough to attract attention. Always enough to matter. Luke rested both hands on the back of a chair. I've never been much for figures. I can tell. He laughed softly. So everyone keeps reminding me. She glanced up for just a second. His laughter surprised her more than it surprised him. She lowered her eyes again. There are too many mistakes. Mistakes? Maybe. She dipped the pen into fresh ink. Or maybe someone hopes they look like mistakes. The following morning, the ranch came alive before sunrise. Coffee simmered on the stove. Boots crossed the porch. Harness buckles clinked in the yard. Luke found Nora already outside. She stood inside the main storage building, counting flour sacks one by one. Otis entered carrying a clipboard. "You won't need to trouble yourself with inventory, ma'am." Nora brushed a bit of flour from her sleeve. "I've nearly finished." Otis smiled politely. "I've handled these records for years." "I'm sure you have." She looked directly at him. "Would you mind telling me why shelf 3 lists 16 sacks when there are only 13? The smile remained. Only his eyes changed. "I'll have to look into that." "I imagine you should." Luke watched the exchange from the doorway. Neither person raised a voice. Neither moved. Yet the air inside the warehouse suddenly felt colder than the Wyoming morning. Otis closed his clipboard. "I'll correct it." He walked away at an even pace. Only after he disappeared behind the stable did Luke notice how tightly the older man had been gripping the edges of the clipboard. Nora picked up another ledger from the shelf. She dusted the cover with the back of her hand, then quietly said, "Numbers don't lie." Luke looked toward the office where Otis had gone. "No." He folded his arms. "But people sometimes do." Far inside the ranch office, hidden behind the locked desk drawer, another ledger rested beneath the first one. One that Nora had not yet seen. One that Otis hoped she never would. 3 days passed with the quiet rhythm of ranch life. The sun climbed a little higher each morning. Snow retreated from the hillsides in uneven patches, leaving dark earth beneath. The cattle drifted farther into the lower pasture, and the creek carried more water with every passing day. Nora learned the habits of Harlan Ridge one chore at a time. She knew which gate stuck after rain. She knew which cook always added too much salt to the stew. She knew Luke preferred his coffee black and left the house before daylight, never waking the ranch hands with unnecessary orders. One morning she found his work gloves drying beside the stove after a long ride through sleet. The leather had split along one finger. She said nothing. That afternoon she stitched the tear with heavy waxed thread from the sewing basket. The gloves were back on the kitchen table before Luke returned. He picked them up, turned them over in his hands. The repair was almost impossible to notice. He glanced toward the pantry where Nora was checking flour receipts. "Thank you." She didn't stop writing. "They'll last another season." A quiet smile crossed his face before he slipped them into his coat pocket. The ledgers continued to trouble her. Each evening another receipt failed to match another shipment. Feed, harness leather, fence wire, lamp oil, small amounts. Always small enough to disappear inside a busy ranch. Yet together they added up to far more than Luke realized. Late one afternoon, she walked toward the storage sheds carrying a folded inventory list. She stopped beside the wagon yard. Fresh wheel tracks crossed the muddy ground. Not ranch wagons. Narrow wheels. Iron rims recently polished. The tracks led toward the water gate before disappearing onto hard ground. She crouched for a closer look. A ranch hand called from behind. "Mrs. Harlan?" She folded the paper and stood. "Has anyone delivered supplies today?" "No, ma'am, huh?" "No freight?" He shook his head. "Not since Tuesday." She looked back at the tracks. Someone had visited. Someone who had not wanted to be noticed. That evening the wind changed. Clouds rolled over the mountains. By sunset, every loose board on the barn roofs rattled. Luke finished securing the north pasture fence before dark. "The wind's coming hard," he told Otis. "We'll keep an eye on the hay storage." Otis nodded calmly. "I'll make another round before bed." Nora stood on the porch watching dust sweep across the yard. Something felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious. Just wrong. Near midnight, the first shout broke the silence. Fire! Luke was already awake. He threw open the bedroom door and ran outside wearing only his work shirt beneath a heavy coat. Orange light danced against the clouds. The hay barn beside the water gate burned like a lantern. Flames climbed the dry timber walls. Horses screamed from nearby corrals. Luke sprinted across the yard. 2 ranch hands struggled with the main barn doors. A heavy support beam had shifted in the heat. Luke planted both boots in the dirt, wrapped both hands around the iron handle. Pull! The men pulled with him. The swollen wood groaned, then burst open. The trapped horses thundered into the open pasture. Buckets moved from the well. Men formed a line. Water splashed against burning boards only to vanish in clouds of steam. Nora didn't join the bucket line. She ran toward the far side of the water gate. The wind carried sparks away from the barn. Beyond the fence, she found them again. Fresh wagon tracks, the same narrow wheels, leading away through the cottonwoods. She followed them several yards until something caught beneath her boot. A scrap of scorched paper, half burned. One corner survived, stamped in faded blue ink, Rocky Mountain Territorial Bank, Colorado. Her fingers tightened around it. She had seen that seal before, years ago, on documents that disappeared after her father's land was taken. She slipped the paper into her coat pocket without a word. Morning revealed black beams still smoking beneath a gray sky. The hay barn was gone. The water gate had survived. Barely. Luke stood beside the ashes, tired eyes fixed on the loss. We'll rebuild. One of the ranch hands nodded. We always do. Before anyone could speak again, another wagon rolled into the yard. Grant Whitmore climbed down wearing a clean gray coat untouched by soot. I heard what happened. Luke gave only a short nod. Grant surveyed the damage. That's a hard loss. It is. If rebuilding stretches your finances, Grant paused politely, I'd still be willing to purchase the lower pasture near the creek. Fair price. Cash. Luke's answer came without hesitation. No. Grant smiled as though expecting it. My offer remains. As he turned away, Otis spoke just loudly enough for nearby workers to hear. Funny thing. Everyone looked toward him. I saw Mrs. Harlan near the hay barn yesterday evening. Silence settled across the yard. Otis continued. Maybe she noticed something. Several pairs of eyes turned toward Nora. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed the burned paper. Not yet. She wasn't ready. Luke looked from Otis to Nora. He searched her face. She met his eyes. Neither spoke. The silence lasted only a few seconds. To Nora, it felt much longer. Grant climbed back into his wagon. As he gathered the reins, he looked once toward Otis. The smallest nod passed between them, so slight that almost no one noticed. Almost. Nora did. She watched Grant Whitmore's wagon disappear beyond the cottonwoods, while the smoke from the burned hay barn drifted across the valley. Otis bent to pick up a charred bucket. His face looked concerned. His hands never trembled. Nora slipped the burned scrap of paper deeper into her coat pocket. Not here. Not yet. The men spent the rest of the morning clearing blackened beams from the foundation. Luke worked beside every ranch hand without giving a single order he would not do himself. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his forearms. Ash streaked his coat. By noon, soot covered his hands so completely they looked stained. Nora carried fresh coffee to the workers in an old blue enamel pot. When she reached Luke, he accepted the cup with a quiet nod. You should rest. So should you. He looked toward the ruined barn. We'll need another before winter. You will. The words were simple. Still, they sounded like a promise. That evening, Nora spread receipts across the dining table again. The burned paper lay beside them. She compared dates, freight numbers, warehouse stamps. One shipment from Colorado carried the same faded banking mark. Her heartbeat slowed, not from fear, from recognition. A knock sounded at the kitchen door. Luke stepped inside, removing his hat. "You've hardly eaten." "I'm not hungry." He noticed the papers. "Did you find something?" "Not enough." She hesitated. "If I accuse someone now, I'll only sound desperate." Luke pulled out a chair but did not sit. "I don't think you're desperate." She met his eyes. "What do you think?" He searched for the right words. "I think you've been trying to protect this ranch since the day you arrived." For the first time since the fire, the distance between them seemed smaller. Then footsteps crossed the porch. Otis entered carrying a cloth money pouch. "I found this while checking the guest room." He placed it gently on the table. Silver coins clinked inside. Luke frowned. "I've never seen that before." Otis untied the cord. Several folded banknotes rested beneath the coins. "So have I." His eyes settled on Nora. It was under Mrs. Harlan's bed. Silence filled the room. Nora stared at the pouch. "I've never touched it." Otis sighed as though the moment disappointed him. "I hoped there'd be another explanation." Luke looked from the pouch to Nora. She didn't reach for it, didn't defend herself immediately. She simply stood still. Finally, she spoke. "Someone wanted it found." Otis folded his arms. "That's possible." His tone suggested otherwise. "Or perhaps someone has been taking money a little at a time." The words lingered long after he left the room. The following morning, the story had already traveled across the ranch. Conversations stopped when Nora passed. A stable hand who had smiled at her the week before lowered his eyes. The cook stirred the breakfast pot without speaking. Only Luke behaved exactly as he always had. He carried fence posts, checked cattle, shared the noon meal at the same table. But something weighed on him. Nora could see it in the way he paused before speaking, in the way his coffee cooled untouched. Late that afternoon, she found him repairing a broken gate near the south pasture. He drove the final nail into place and rested both hands on the weathered wood. "I've been thinking." "So have I." "The money, it isn't mine." "I know." She looked up quickly. "You know? I don't believe you hid it." A breeze carried the smell of damp grass across the pasture. "Then why does it still feel like I'm standing alone?" Luke let out a slow breath. "Because believing something isn't the same as proving it." He removed his work gloves. "I need time." "Time for what?" "To find out who's behind this." Nora's shoulders stiffened. "And until then?" "I need everyone to stay calm." She heard something different. She heard caution, distance, doubt. "So you want me to wait while people decide who I am?" "That's not what I said." "It isn't?" He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for words that would not come. "I only mean, you only mean you aren't ready to stand beside me." The gate creaked in the wind. Neither of them moved. Luke reached toward her, then stopped halfway. "I don't want to make the wrong move." Nora's voice softened. "You already have." Before sunrise the next morning, the ranch was still wrapped in blue-gray light. A lantern burned in the kitchen. Nora folded her dresses with careful hands. She packed the burned bank paper, the receipts, her notebook. Nothing else. On the table, she placed Luke's repaired gloves. Beside them rested the small handkerchief she had mended during her first week at Harlan Ridge. Underneath was the ledger she had spent night after night correcting. A single note lay on top. "The missing shipments begin 6 months before I arrived. The truth is already here. You only have to keep looking." She lifted her trunk. The front door closed without a sound. From the upstairs window, Luke woke to the quiet scrape of wagon wheels on the distant road. He hurried downstairs barefoot. The front porch was empty. Only the folded handkerchief remained beside the ledger. He picked it up. The stitching was fine, strong enough to outlast the cloth itself. His eyes dropped to the open ledger. Page after page of careful notes, corrected totals, missing invoices, freight numbers connected by neat pencil lines. At the bottom of the final page, she had written one sentence. "Your ranch is worth saving. I hope one day you believe I was worth trusting." Luke lowered himself into the nearest chair. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved through the cottonwoods. Inside, the house had never felt so large or so quiet. Luke remained at the kitchen table long after the morning sun reached the window. Nora's ledger lay open before him. Beside every corrected total, she had written a date. Beside every date, she had marked a receipt number. There was no anger in her handwriting, only patience. He followed the trail one page at a time. Feed purchased, but never delivered. Fence wire paid for twice. Freight invoices bearing the same initials. The missing money had not vanished all at once. It had disappeared like water through a cracked bucket. By noon, Luke saddled his horse and rode to Dust Creek. The station agent remembered a freight driver named Eli Turner, a quiet man who hauled supplies between Cheyenne and the Powder River settlements. "You'll find him near Red Hollow," the agent said. "He's hauling grain for tomorrow's auction." Luke found Eli before sunset repairing a wagon wheel outside a blacksmith shop. "I need the truth." Eli wiped grease from his hands. "I figured someday somebody would." Luke placed Nora's ledger on the workbench. Eli studied one page and slowly nodded. "I hauled those shipments." "Then tell me why the numbers don't match." "They matched when I picked them up." "What changed?" Eli looked down the empty street before answering. "Otis Webb met me outside town more than once. Said Mr. Harlan wanted part of the load stored elsewhere. I was paid extra to keep my mouth shut." Luke's jaw tightened. "Who paid you?" Eli reached into his coat and unfolded an old receipt. A second signature appeared beneath Otis's. "Grant Whitmore." Luke folded the paper carefully. "When will you say that in front of other people?" Eli looked him straight in the eye. "When you ask." The next morning, the valley around Red Hollow Creek filled with wagons. Spring auctions always drew a crowd. Ranchers inspected breeding bulls. Merchants compared grain prices. Families wandered between supply tents carrying cups of hot coffee. At the center of the field stood a long wooden table where bids for water rights would be recorded before the county clerk. Grant Whitmore arrived wearing a fresh black coat. Otis Webb walked several steps behind him. Both men smiled as though the day already belonged to them. Luke rode in alone. Dust covered his boots. His hat showed the marks of 2 hard days on the trail. Several people noticed Nora was not with him. Whispers drifted through the crowd. The marriage didn't last. "I heard she left." Poor Harlan. Grant stepped forward with easy confidence. "I suppose you've reconsidered my offer." Luke placed Nora's ledger on the clerk's table. "No." Grant glanced at the worn cover. "A bookkeeping lesson won't buy water." "It might buy the truth." The county clerk looked up. "What is this about, Mr. Harlan?" Luke answered without raising his voice. "I'd like a witness to speak before today's bidding begins." Heads turned as Eli Turner walked out from behind a freight wagon. He removed his hat. "I carried shipments to Harlan Ridge." Grant's smile faded. Eli continued. "I was paid to unload part of those supplies before they ever reached the ranch." The crowd grew still. The clerk accepted the receipts from Luke. One by one, he compared them to the figures inside Nora's ledger. "They match." Otis took a quick step backward. Grant spoke sharply. "One freight driver proves nothing." A calm voice answered from behind the crowd. Then perhaps these will. People stepped aside. Nora James walked into the open square carrying a leather document case. Her traveling coat was dusty from the road, but her shoulders were as straight as the day she stepped onto the platform at Dust Creek. Luke looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She placed several folded documents before the county clerk. These are certified copies from the Rocky Mountain Territorial Bank in Colorado. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. They show the same payment method used to steal my father's property. She looked toward Otis. The account numbers are identical. Then she turned toward Grant, and the payments were approved through Mr. Whitmore's business office. A heavy silence settled across Red Hollow Creek. Otis's face lost its color. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it again. The county sheriff stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. I believe both gentlemen will remain here until we've sorted this out. No one argued. Luke finally walked toward Nora. He stopped an arm's length away. I was too slow. She looked at him quietly. I know. I should have trusted you before I understood everything. You should have. He accepted the truth without lowering his eyes. From inside his coat, he removed a folded document. The deed to Harlan Ridge. I won't ask you to come back because you feel sorry for me. He handed the paper to her. I've already signed the transfer. Half the ranch belongs to you if you still want it. She stared at the document, then at him. Why? Because you earned it long before you left. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair. When you arrived, Luke said softly, I thought I was bringing home a wife. He smiled, tired but honest. What I brought home was the only partner this ranch ever truly had. Nora folded the deed and slipped it carefully into the document case. She did not answer with words. She simply stepped beside him, close enough that everyone watching understood. The clerk cleared his throat. Shall we begin the auction? Luke looked toward Nora. She nodded once. Let's finish today's work. By late afternoon, the bids were settled. The water rights remained with Harlan Ridge. As the wagons rolled away beneath the golden light, Luke and Nora climbed into the same wagon they had ridden from Dust Creek weeks before. This time, neither of them sat at opposite ends of the bench. The road home stretched across the Wyoming Valley. Ahead stood a ranch that still needed fences repaired, barns rebuilt, and fields planted. They would face every one of those days together. The seasons would keep turning over Harlan Ridge. Winter would test the fences. Spring would ask for new seeds. Summer would demand long days beneath the Wyoming sun. And each season would leave its own marks, just as life had left its marks on Luke and Nora. The ranch was never saved by one strong man alone, nor by one brave woman carrying old wounds. It endured because two people chose to trust again after disappointment had taught them to be careful. Love did not erase the hard days behind them. It simply gave those days a different ending. Years from now, visitors might remember Luke as the towering cowboy whose quiet presence could calm a frightened horse. Others might remember Nora for the neat ledgers, the thriving fields, and the steady wisdom she brought to every decision. But those who truly knew them would remember something even greater. They never stopped choosing each other. Perhaps that's what real partnership has always been. Not finding someone without scars, but finding someone whose hand you are willing to hold while building a life that is honest, earned, and shared. If you had been standing where Luke stood that morning, would you have trusted your heart before all the proof was in your hands? If stories like this leave you with something to carry into your own life, I hope you'll join me again. There are many more journeys across the western frontier waiting ahead. Stories of courage, quiet hope, and the kind of love that grows stronger with every mile.